I'm live. Good morning, everybody. Today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about sim training. I know when I was in flight training, before I was a pilot at the airlines, I was always curious what exactly simulator training was. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of what I did. Now, the simulator training will be different depending on if you are, which company you work for. When I was at a regional airline, it was a little bit different than what I do now at a major airline. So I'll talk about the regional airline, just the differences at the very end. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. All right, so I always fly out a day early for simulator training just so that I can get settled into the hotel room and have time to do some last minute studying. Day one of the simulator was just kind of getting the feel of the airplane again. And it was so different this year going back because hardly anybody has been flying. The captain that I was paired up with, he hadn't flown at all since this first or second week of March. And with me, I've only flown 3 days since the third week of March. So we're just a little bit more rusty. And same with the sim instructors. Our sim instructor also hasn't flown at all since he's flown in the simulator to stay current, but he hasn't actually flown the airplane since this whole COVID mess started. So it did feel a little bit different this year. But either way, day one, we get back into the sim, we brushed off some of the cobwebs, and we just practiced some maneuvers. Now, in real life, we do hand fly the airplane, but we're not hand flying the airplane the whole flight. We're gonna use autopilot. I personally like to turn on autopilot at some point between 10 and 20,000 feet, just because I don't want to bust an ATC clearance. Most pilots are the same way. We'll fly it for a little bit, but we're not flying it, the whole flight. We're not having an hour or 2 hours of hand flying the airplane every flight. So in the simulator, we do a lot of hand flying, which is good. So we started doing just a regular takeoff. We hand flew the takeoff, and then I don't remember the exact order of everything because it always seems to go so fast. But then we also practiced some slow flights. It wasn't technically a stall, but we do what we call upset recovers. And it's basically recoveries from unusual attitudes. We just have a fancy name for it. A tangent here. I remember when I was a student and a flight instructor wondering why we had to practice unusual attitude recovery so often. And then coming to the airlines, we practice it every single simulator session because unusual attitudes happen, whether it's from wake turbulence or maybe you thought you had the autopilot on and you didn't, and now the airplane's just doing what it wants, and now you need to be able to recover the airplane from an unusual attitude. So it's a huge deal. So we practiced a bunch of those, just manually flying the plane. And then we also did some traffic collision avoidance recoveries where there's another airplane, maybe they're not listening to their ATC clearance and they descend or they're climbing, and it's going to be a factor where you guys could have a mid-air collision. So we practiced what to do when that happens, how to obviously not hit the airplane, and then report it to ATC and get back on course. So we did some of that. We also practiced we didn't actually do the holds, but we practiced setting up the holds so that the airplane could enter the hold properly. And going back to when I was a student pilot, when I was learning holds, man, I always wondered, is this actually something we're going to use in real life? And honestly, I don't think I've done a hold, a real hold at all since being at a major airline. When I was at SkyWest, I think I did just 2, real holds where they tell you to enter, a certain DME fix, and you got to figure out if it's teardrop or parallel entry. So honestly, it's not that often. With us, they just make sure we know how to enter everything into our box so that the airplane will fly the hold properly. So we practiced that. And then another thing that's been kind of I don't know if they call it a hot spot, it's just something that the airline is focusing right now, is what to do if you don't have a reliable airspeed. When you're doing your instrument flight training, you guys practice this all the time with losing your vacuum instruments or other random instruments. The instructor will put post-it notes over them or blacken out the screen and have you fly without some of the information that you typically not that you need it, but it's really nice to have for the flight. So our hotspot item is being able to fly the airplane without a reliable airspeed. And there's a checklist procedure, there's memory items for that. And so we practiced that, and it was actually, it's always comforting to do that, because then you know, like, okay, if this happens, this is what I'm looking for, and this is what I do, so then it won't be a big deal when it happens. So we did spend some time on that. And then we did again, hand flying the airplane, which I know for you guys that don't even have autopilot, you think I'm such a baby. But we've hand flew an approach and then a missed approach procedure. And I think that was pretty much it on the first day. Let me just check through my notes and make sure I'm not missing anything. But yeah, it was a lot of hand flying that first day, which the simulator is never going to feel exactly the same as the airplane. It's always going to feel a little bit more sensitive just because you don't have the actual resistance from airflow, but it's pretty similar. The last thing we did was a Category 3 approach, which is basically landing with not very much weather visibility. You're basically saying, the airplane lands itself on a Category 3 approach. The captain's flying it, and I'm just the pilot monitoring, and I'm just making sure that everything is, how it's supposed to be. And you basically get the runway in sight 50 feet above the ground, which maybe seems like a lot, but it's 2 seconds, and there's the runway and we're landing, or maybe you only even see the runway lights. But you do have to see something, but the airplane will land, and then it will even stop the airplane until you turn off the automation and then stop it fully or taxi off the runway. So we did practice that. So day 1 is not a test. It's just getting back into the airplane, hand flying it, practice a bunch of things that we don't get to do in everyday flying. Day 2 was an actual test. So we don't go in and practice any things on that day. We first meet with the simulator instructor, and sometimes it's the same guy both days, or guy or girl, whoever the instructor is. This year, I had a different person on day 1 and a different person day 2. But we first sat down, and they go over and make sure that we have all the required paperwork, just like you would for a check ride. They need to see your ID, your medical, what else? We have to show them our radio license, our FCC radio license, which you'll need when you become an airline pilot. So they make sure we have all the required paperwork, and then they call it a systems validation, but all it's doing is making sure that we have all the memory items memorized, for your emergencies. You guys have done it, if you have an engine failure, what are the first 3 things that you need to do, and then you'll turn to the QRH and do the rest of the procedure. So we went through the memory items, and then we are also quizzed on the limitations. And the limitations are just things like how high can the airplane fly, what's the max altitude for the flaps, things like that. So we're tested on that, and then they test you on the walk around, but obviously we don't have a plane there, and so they have slides or photos, and they just ask you what is this, what are you looking for when you're right here on the airplane. So that's the ground portion of the check ride part, and then after that you go and do the check ride. At the major, there's 2 different check rides. When I was at a regional, we did both of them back to back in one day. At this major airline, it's one every 9 months, and so you keep alternating every other 9 months. And so this time it was an LOE, which basically simulates just a flight from point A to point B, and you'll have some abnormal scenario. It could be, maybe you lose a generator, or maybe you have oil pressure that's not within limits. You'll have to pull out the QRH and go through that. It could be your airspeed's not reliable. Like I mentioned earlier, that's kind of been a hot spot for us the last little bit. So they just give you, it's not like this crazy emergency procedure, not normally. It's just a normal flight from A to B, and something unusual happens that forces you to work as a crew and pull out the QRH, or pretty sure that's what they call it when you're in general aviation, but I can't remember, the book with all the emergency checklists in it. So we did that, and we flew from, I think it was Boston to JFK, or it might have been the other way around. And when we were going to lower our flaps to set up for the approach, our flaps didn't lower. So we had to tell air traffic control, and this is just in the simulator, this is not a real event. We just had to tell air traffic control that we were having a flap malfunction, and that we needed radar vectors, like in a boxed pattern or in a holding pattern, so that we could have time to assess the situation and figure out what steps we needed to take. So we the captain had me fly the airplane, and then he ran through all the checklists out of the QRH and, pushed all the switches and did everything we needed to do. And we were able to get our flaps extended. It just took a lot longer to extend them, just because the system wasn't working properly. So we got the flaps extended, we got our gear down, and then we flew, and I just continued flying the approach at this point instead of handing the controls back to the captain. And we just did a normal landing. So that was the test, not so bad. And then after, we still had, that only took about an hour, and the sim sessions are normally 4 hours long. We had a little break, and then we went back into the simulator and just practiced a few more maneuvers that tend to be, again, things that we don't get to practice all that often, but it's really important for us to know how to do it properly. So some of those maneuvers were, if we experience wind shear on takeoff. And you all know, if you get wind shear, don't change your gear flaps, power all the way up, and just pitch up as much as you can without stalling to get out of the wind shear. Most of us can do that portion pretty well, but sometimes in a larger airplane, the recovery from the recovery is sometimes what's more difficult. So after you've recovered from the wind shear, now how do you get the airplane back to what it was that you were doing? So we practiced that a few times. We did some wind shear recoveries on takeoff, and then we also did them on approach. So that was really good practice. And then some of the other things we did, we did a high energy visual approach. This was really interesting to see. Basically, it's where you have to do a descent greater than a 3 degree descent, like inside the final approach fix. Most glide slopes have a 3 degree glide slope. And if you're in a GA airplane and you're descending like between 600 and 700 feet on final, that's about a 3 degree glide slope. Some airports though can't do that because of obstacles in the way, or maybe there's rich people that live here and they don't want you flying over their house at such a low altitude. Whatever the reason is, there's some airports where you purposely have to be high and then descend fairly quickly, greater than 3 degrees, to get to the airport and land in the touchdown zone of the runway, the first 3,000 feet typically. So we practiced some of those, and that was kind of interesting to see. In a big jet, you have to have gear down, flaps where you want them, airspeed where you want it when you're high, so that you can still continue that descent and not end up getting fast. In a smaller airplane, you guys should still practice it. It was kind of fun. But you don't have to be quite so aggressive. So we did some of that, and then we just did slow flight, which this brought me back to my instrument days, especially being an instrument flight instructor, where I think this is the first lesson when you get an instrument student, is you have them put the gear down, the flaps all the way extended, and then you just fly just a few knots above the stall speed. And you just keep it on that airspeed. The instructor had us do 500 foot per minute climbs, 500 foot per minute descents while we were turning, while we were keeping the airspeed. So I know for some of you guys that are in instrument training or even private pilot training, you guys are doing this all the time. You probably think it's so silly that we still practice it when we're at the airlines, but we do. Because if you don't practice it all the time, guess what? You lose it. So that was kind of fun to do, and just to see how well the aircraft could perform. I think we were at 130 knots, which was like so slow, and the airplane performed just so well. You're on the backside of the power curve, so you really have to add a lot more power to keep your airspeed that slow, but that's what we practiced, and it was kind of good to do that. So that was pretty much it. So now, if we weren't going through a possible furlough and the whole mess of this COVID, then in 9 months from now, I'd be going back to the simulator, and things, they would do different maneuvers on the day one, and then on day two, it would be more like a traditional check ride that you're used to hearing about, like as going through your regular flight training. We would do a lot of engine failures on takeoff, on landing. We do missed approach procedures with engine failures, and then just a lot more maneuvering. So that's like your more standard check ride that you guys are used to. So every 9 months, we just alternate between the two. That's pretty much it. So I don't know, do you guys have any questions? You guys are so quiet, no questions about simulator training. I just wanted to talk about it because, like I said, when I was a student pilot, I always wondered like what exactly it entailed, and was it so awful having to fly the sim, or was it super fun having to fly the sim? And so I just want to keep you guys informed in case you want to become airline pilots, just so you have a better idea of what it is. So as always, if you have any questions for me, you can just DM me, or you can even email me directly at trendypilots@gmail.com. I'm happy to help you guys out. I'm obviously not working very much, and I'm obsessed with aviation. So seriously, guys, don't be shy. Ask the questions, and I'm happy to help you out. So until next time, I do plan to be live next Thursday at 10, and I'll let you know the topic. I'll post it either on Tuesday or Wednesday. And if there's any posts that you like, then you're always welcome to share them with other people or share them on your news feed. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.